Hello everyone, welcome back to the signature segment of the 3 Hour News Show. See the stories. Now, before we begin our talk show, let's talk about violence against women. So the United Nations defines violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or mental harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private life.
Estimates published by the World Health Organization indicate that about 1 in 3, or 30% of women worldwide, have been subjected to either physical and/or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence in their lifetime.
Globally, almost 1/3, or 27% of women aged 15 to 49 years who have been in a relationship report that they have been subjected to some form of physical and/or sexual violence by their intimate partner.
The annual record of Indonesia's Commission on Violence Against Women, or Komnas Perempuan, reported that the number of violence against women in 2023 is more than 289,000 cases, where the victims are mainly younger women with lower education levels.
The Commission also reported that the highest violence cases of psychological violence, with a total of 3,000 cases, or 41.55 or 41.55%, followed by physical violence with 2,081 or 24.71%, sexual violence with 2,078 or about 24.69%, and economic violence with 762 or 9.05%.
Wow, what a number.
Now, to delve more about violence against women from legal perspective, we're now in the studio having advocate Patriani, Paramita, Mulia. Bagaimana, thank you for coming to see today's studio. And yes, it is. We want to talk about this matter on sexual harassment or violence against women. So it seems like the numbers have been escalating, and yes, this is throughout Indonesia, all around Indonesia. So first of all, how does Indonesia's legal system define domestic violence and sexual violence?
Well,
that's like a long
yeah, it's
inhale.
Yeah, because most people they see domestic violence and sexual violence as one thing, while it's actually very closely related to one another, but it's not exactly the same thing. Right. So to make it very simple, in an effort of not oversimplifying things, domestic violence happens within the domestic sphere, within a household. So it may include sexual violence, but it may also be in other forms of violence. So while sexual violence, obviously it relates to sexual organs, sexual matters, and sexual organs. Yeah.
So we can say that there's a sexual violence, although it involves husbands and wives, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe boyfriends and girlfriends.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure, which is not widely known, unfortunately. So for example, it doesn't have to be physical, it may also be psychological.
Or verbal, perhaps?
Exactly. And also coercion. For example, coercion to use some sort of contraception, for example. It may be against a woman's belief or will, but their spouse forced them to use contraception. It's a form of sexual violence within a household as well.
Well, I believe this topic is strongly related to us because 1 out of 3 women suffer from domestic violence, both sexual or physical or verbal violence from their male partners, right? And well, I think many of us in this studio somehow also experience that,
Perhaps,
yes. In our mother or maybe our sisters, right? So what I'm really gonna ask is, do we actually have the, regulatory framework to protect women? I heard about TPKS, Tindak Pidana Kejahatan Sexual Act, that has been in place since years ago, but the implementation is very weak. So can you explain more about that? We've got the regulation, but in terms of implementation, we're very weak at it.
Well, yeah, we do have the laws. We have the criminal law, as the very core basis of the law. And we also have law against domestic violence and the law against sexual violence. So we do have some legal frameworks in place. But again, when it comes to enforcement, it requires a lot of campaign awareness, campaign raising awareness. And I think a lot of the people in Indonesia, they don't realize that a particular action may be defined as violence.
Right.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I read this article, and it showed this situation in West Java, where there was this violence between very young male and female, and what they did to them were basically putting them into a marriage situation.
Forced marriage.
Forced marriage.
Yeah.
So how is your part in sort of like seeing this kind of practices that happens in our country, and perhaps not only in West Java, maybe in other sort of like provinces as well?
Well, we have to look at the social setup as well. So forced marriage, for example, is included as sexual violence. But I think that's simplifying it in terms of the legal frameworks. But if you look at the implementation within the livelihood of the people, especially in the rural area, we have to also look at the living conditions, economic needs. So maybe that plays a factor as well.
There was a tendency that they got married at a very young age because of the economical situation.
Exactly. So that's also an example where people don't realize that they're actually under sexual violence.
Wow.
So if someone is under sexual or domestic violence, can you guide us what steps they have to take from the initial report first, and then that will lead them to the police report?
Right. So first and foremost, I think it's very important for the victims to seek refuge in people that they trust. Because a lot of the victims, they experience a lot of trauma, and it's very difficult to retell what they experience. So first of all, seek refuge from someone that they trust.
Maybe their parents or their
Parents,
siblings.
family, or trusted friends,
Okay.
for example, because it may also happen within the domestic sphere. And then second of all, I think we have to be thankful in that the police, they have already structured a specific directorate for the protection of women and children. So go to the police with the help and assistance and hopefully counsel of a trusted friend. Go to the police, report them. And I think the police has been well trained into being more sensitive in handling those kind of cases.
Is that the case though? Because there are many criticisms towards the police in terms of their sensitivity and in terms of the urgency to be on the side of the victims instead of the perpetrators,
Like they
right?
needed like the proofs, they need
Exactly,
everything.
or they don't take it sensitively and seriously. There are many criticisms towards the police for handling domestic and violence against women. Do you think that is still the case, or the police has changed in a positive direction?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer, because I think there is always room for improvements all the time. But I'm thankful that we already have, at the very least, the specific directorate for the women and children. And they're very well trained into accepting these kind of reports. Maybe not in all areas of Indonesia yet.
Yeah.
It's a process in progress. So I think we are going towards that point.
Okay, so the progress has been positive in terms of the implementation of the PSK law in our country.
I'd like to believe so. I'd like to believe so. Because I'm also a woman, yeah? I'd like to believe so.
Yeah, we had this discussion before the show. You were saying that it's not easy to be a woman and, have the sort of like the bravery to basically report, what happened to us, right? So what challenges, based on your experiences facing the victims perhaps, or the survivors, the ones that they face when reporting this violence, and how does the legal system address these challenges for a survivor to basically, report what happened to them?
Well, first of all, I think the main challenge is fear of being publicly judged. I've met several victims, and they feel that they're not victims. They feel that what happened to them is normal, because they're women and they're supposed to be subjected to certain kinds of actions.
Wow.
So I think raising awareness is a #1 priority.
Okay.
Because if we go back to enforcement, we can have all the legal enforcement at hand.
Yeah, yeah.
But if people don't know that these are violations, people won't report it.
I think it also relates to our patriarchal culture,
Exactly.
right? Where man is positioned above women. So when it comes to violence against women, many people, including women themselves, don't see it as a violence, don't see it as a, you go beyond the red lines.
Yeah, it's like
right?
their fate as women, so it's okay that it happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how to change, well, I know it's going to be about education, right? But how to change that perception and how to break down this patriarchal culture that is ingrained deeply in our society?
Well, I think events or, news like this segment is also helpful in raising awareness. Exactly, advocating. We also have Komnas Perempuan, like you mentioned before, and they have a lot of activities and awareness raising campaign going down to the grassroots. I think that's very important.
So what do you think is the biggest challenge? I mean, is it the patriarchal setting that we have, or is there any other, problems that women are facing when it comes to having that bravery and understanding that it is not okay that it happens to them?
Yeah, I think it's more about psychological feelings and social pressure. Because if we look into the law, they already provided safe houses, counseling. They also allow close court hearings and long-distance examinations so that to prevent trauma to the victims. So the law is protecting the victims, but people need to know that the law is protecting the victims.
Also, in some cases, even after they reported, the woman, let's say she reported, but then she came back to the family or came back to the husband, and then that happened again. So it's like the circle that never...
Yeah, generational gaps as well.
Wow.
Maybe the victim is brave enough, but maybe not the family.
Yeah.
I think this is case for case.
Right.
It's difficult to generalize.
I think I want to dig deeper later after
Sure.
our break about the limitation of a man. I'm a man, right? So when it comes to getting married, is there any limitation? Oh, this constitutes verbal violence. This constitutes sexual violence.
Very important
This constitutes
to understand.
light, medium, and heavy violence against women.
Sure.
We want to know what's the perimeter and limitations of that, and that will be discussed in the next segment. Don't go anywhere.